In Australia, MPs held a vote today. A vote to call for the return of Julian Assange, an Australian citizen and the man behind Wikileaks. You may remember him. For those who don't, here's a primer. Julian Assange ran a website called Wikileaks. It published thousands of classified US documents that had details about potential American war crimes, documents that exposed American hypocrisy to the world. Assange published these leaked documents. And for this, he's been in detention for almost 12 years. He spent 7 years inside an embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Initially, he was granted asylum there, but in 2019, he was kicked out and immediately arrested by the London police. He was sentenced to 50 weeks in prison. This was for violating bail in an old case. He was thrown into Belmarsh, a high-security prison in London, and he's been there ever since. Assange should have been free by 2020, after his 50-week jail term concluded. Instead, he has remained in prison, awaiting his extradition to the United States of America. You see, America wants to get its hands on Assange and properly reward him for exposing their crimes by giving him up to 175 years in prison, effectively a death sentence. Julian Assange has been appealing the extradition. The final hearing is next week. If he loses, he may be shipped off to the US, and that's where Australia comes back into the picture. Australian members of parliament are trying to prevent this, to save Assange from extradition. They put forth a motion in parliament to call on the US and the UK to drop this prosecution of Assange. And that motion passed with 86 for and 42 against. MPs across party lines in Australia voted to bring Assange home. So did Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. It's his strongest statement yet. He's trying to prove that he's serious about getting Assange back and that Australia is on the right side of history here. Because the Assange case is purely about America's vendetta. The US has charged him under its draconian Espionage Act. As I mentioned, he may get up to 175 years in prison if convicted. Now, you may wonder, what exactly is he guilty of? He published leaked, classified documents. He did not leak them, he published them. Journalists do it all the time. It's how you get to know about the worst government scandals. In this case, Assange exposed American lies about Iraq and Afghanistan, how the US lied about civilian death tolls, how they misclassified some of their innocent victims as enemy combatants, how they lied about sending prisoners to torture chambers. Basically, standard US operating procedure, that's what he exposed. And we already know that the US commits war crimes. The documents were the smoking gun. They should have led to shame and introspection. Instead, the US began a witch hunt. Assange has been hounded from the moment he published the documents. Remember, he just published them. It is not a crime, not even in the US, not yet anyway. So what are they prosecuting him for? The charges seem ridiculous. They say instead of just publishing the documents, Assange arranged to hack into American databases, and that is a crime. It is why whistleblowers often end up in prison. But journalists escape. Because journalists are just doing their jobs by publishing the material. They cannot be persecuted for that. Or they should not be, at least. Which is why the US wants to prove that Assange is a hacker, not a journalist. It will make it easier for them to punish him. They also want to declare that Assange is not a journalist, so that he could still be jailed for just publishing classified material. Think about how ridiculous that is. Should only certified journalists have the right to expose government crimes? As I said, the whole thing reeks of vendetta. It's America trying to crack down on the freedom of speech. Washington trying to bully people into silence. Classic Western hypocrisy. The US is beating up Assange, and the UK is holding his hands behind his back while America does it. These are the so-called Western champions of free speech. The only silver lining in the story is Australia.
Because regardless of what you might think of Julian Assange, and I acknowledge in this place there's a range of views. There are people that loathe the man. There are people who worship the man. But I tell you what, no matter which end of that spectrum you are positioned, just about everyone agrees this has gone on too long, that it must be brought to an end.
But will the US and the UK listen, or will they put Assange in a cage and throw away the key?
From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill. We know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America.